Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Constructing Kingdoms with the Violet Howler, a literary analysis of the Kingdom Hearts story. As I've discussed at length in previous videos, Riku and Sora's character journeys and the overarching plot of the series as a whole align with a narrative framework known as the heroine's journey, which centers around a protagonist attempting to conform to a set of traits that are valued by society, whether their own or the audience's, in exchange for external validation of their worth. As a result, they either passively neglect or actively repress the parts of themselves that don't fit into that specific mold, and in the process they end up focusing on the desired traits to an unhealthy and ultimately self-destructive degree that leaves them unsatisfied and unfulfilled. In Constructing Kingdoms Episode 4, I briefly mentioned how the traits that the protagonist was trying to conform to were ones most commonly associated with masculinity, while the traits being neglected were ones frequently associated with femininity. However, due to a lack of time and confidence, I was not able to properly expand on this topic, as whenever I tried to talk about that aspect of the heroine's journey in my previous videos, it kept breaking the flow of the monologue and distracting from the topic of the episode. But now that I've got over 2 years of running this channel under my belt, the time has finally come for me to do the deep dive on this aspect of the framework that I've been waiting for. Because it is impossible to fully discuss any version of the heroine's journey framework without talking about gender roles and associated cultural norms regarding gender, because both formulas were specifically crafted to address them. Maureen Murdoch's version was based on her work as a therapist for older women who had shunned the things they associated with femininity and embraced qualities that were seen as masculine to achieve success in male-dominated career fields. Meanwhile, Victoria Lynn Schmidt's introduction to the heroine's journey in her book 45 Master Characters specifically addresses the ways that gender-related issues differentiate it from other storytelling formulas. So from their creation, both heroine's journey frameworks were explicitly designed to reflect the struggles of people who do not fit the rigid boundaries of society's expectations for the gender they were assigned at birth. Which means that a story needs to tackle the gender issues that inspired the creation of these formulas, whether overtly or through metaphor, in order to qualify as a true heroine's journey. And since Kingdom Hearts is a series that centers around 2 male protagonists, this video will be focusing on the potential commentary regarding male gender roles, while discussion of commentary on female gender roles in relation to the ladies of the cast will get its own video at a later date. So for today's episode, let's get down to business as I finally dig in and address how Sora and Riku's journeys reflect the critique of gender norms inherent in the heroine's journey.
Mr. I'll make a man out of you.
As we get started, it's important to note that there has never been one fixed, singular view of male gender norms. The standards of what roles and characteristics are considered ideal for men vary depending on the culture being discussed, and can change over time in response to both internal and external influences. But from what I've been able to tell from my research, the gender norms of Japan and the United States, the countries that produced the 2 companies that made Kingdom Hearts, have at least some places where they overlap. One thing that both cultures have in common is the idea that a man's primary role in society is to be the protector and provider of his household's material needs. Men are expected to be the main breadwinners of their families, going out to hunt or farm or do other labor needed to ensure that their loved ones have food on the table and a roof over their heads. In addition to that, a man is expected to be responsible for protecting the women and children in his family, whether by shielding them from physical threats of violence and bodily harm, or by ensuring that his daughter's potential suitors are worthy of her and won't break her heart. And when a father is not able to fulfill one or both of these expectations himself, whether due to being absent, dead, or simply too old, the responsibility then falls to the eldest son to step up and take over his father's role as the man of the house. The ideal of men as protectors is so pervasive that, at least in the US, there's an entire trope that revolves around female characters being killed, kidnapped, or brutalized for the sole purpose of either motivating the male protagonist's journey or tormenting him with guilt over failing to protect her. Which Kingdom Hearts itself has been accused of using on multiple occasions. And because of this gender role, masculinity in these kinds of cultural environments is frequently linked to physical ability. It's to the point where, at least in the US, one of the most common ways to insult a man's skill at something involving physical strength or athletics has been to say that he does it like a girl. Meanwhile, emotions have typically been linked with femininity, as women in these types of environments are seen as the ones responsible for raising and nurturing children. As a result of this gendered separation between the physical and the emotional, men have typically been discouraged from open displays of emotion out of the belief that expressing their feelings outside of a limited number of acceptable circumstances somehow makes them weak. Men who exhibit fear or sadness or any other negative emotions other than anger are frequently told to man up and push past those feelings. That if you cry or display any sign of vulnerability with your emotions, positive or negative, then you aren't a quote-unquote real man. In discussions of how Kingdom Hearts depicts its male characters and their interactions with each other, particularly Sora and Riku, I've seen a few people over the years argue that the whole boys don't cry mentality isn't as big of a thing in Japanese culture as it's been in the US. But even if there's any truth to that argument, that doesn't mean that this view of manhood doesn't exist in Japanese society at all. For example, the Asahi Shimbun, one of Japan's 5 leading national newspapers, conducted a survey in 2020 about expectations for masculinity where more than a third of the responses answered that not crying or whining was what society expected from being a man. The fact that male characters in Kingdom Hearts are allowed to express their feelings earnestly without ridicule or having the narrative undercut the moment with a derogatory joke about it is something that fans have praised the series for in the US and other Western countries. But even though nobody ever tells Sora to man up when he gets emotional, the mentality that it's undesirable to associate with traits that are considered feminine is still present within the subtext of his environment. Because as I've outlined in multiple previous videos, one of the major driving forces of Sora's character arc is that his emotional abilities have yet to reach their full potential because he's been surrounded by people who emphasize the value of his physical abilities over all else. The other kids on Destiny Islands repeatedly talk about how much better than all of them Riku is because of his physical skill. Donald, Goofy, and the Final Fantasy crew prioritized his usefulness as a warrior over everything else because his magic weapon made him the only one capable of vanquishing the threat of the Heartless. Then in Olympus Coliseum, Phil explains that the Coliseum is a place where heroes come from all over to battle enormous monsters. Goofy defends that Sora being chosen by the Keyblade makes him a hero, and Sora responds to this by arguing that he's already fought a bunch of monsters, but Phil tells Sora that he can't call himself a hero if he can't move the stone pedestal in the lobby. Only after failing to move the pedestal himself does Phil admit that there's more to heroism than just physical strength. And throughout Sora's journey, Donald and Goofy repeatedly discourage him from expressing what he's really feeling about everything that's happening around him by pressuring him to bury all of his pain and sadness behind a smile. Which is a message that's reinforced by other characters in games like Kingdom Hearts 2, where Hayner and even Riku tell Sora to pull himself together when he starts crying. Even though it's never framed as a men don't cry thing, we are still watching a boy being told that emotional vulnerability is undesirable. And as I've talked about in previous videos, Sora has demonstrated a consistent habit of repressing his emotional pain as a direct result of this pressure from his peers and parental figures. So while the series may be devoid of messaging that men aren't allowed to openly express their feelings, the pattern of Sora being discouraged from showing emotional vulnerability while simultaneously being pressured to prioritize his physical strength still lines up with the underlying cultural norms responsible for that mentality. And the emphasis on physical strength from Sora's peers and authority figures also serves as a potential deconstruction of that masculine ideal of being the protector of the family when you examine the seeds planted throughout the first 2 games of the series. When hyping up Riku's superior physical strength, Tidus wonders if Kairi relies on Riku because of that strength. And after stealing the Keyblade in Hollow Bastion, Riku declares that Sora doesn't have what it takes to save Kairi before leaving him with a toy sword. A quote-unquote childish imitation of the real weapon that Riku now carries. And at the end of the game, after Sora has proven his worthiness, slain the metaphorical dragon of Ansem's giant Heartless, and saved the universe from the forces of evil, Riku entrusts him with taking care of Kairi back on the islands. And in Chain of Memories, Larxene asserts that rescuing Naminé is Sora's responsibility as the hero. that because of his status as a Keyblade wielder and savior of the universe, it's his job to live out the standard fairy tale archetype of the knight in shining armor saving the helpless damsel in distress from the dragon keeping her locked in the tower. And as he becomes increasingly fixated on finding Naminé, he recalls a false memory of promising to keep her safe, and expresses in Japanese that he wants to apologize to her, implicitly for failing to protect her like he allegedly promised. Which frames his increasing fixation on saving her as a need to prove that he hasn't failed to keep his promise and live up to his responsibility as her protector. Then when Marluxia orders Naminé to basically lobotomize him under the implicit threat of her being killed if she refuses, Sora tells her to go ahead and do it, even if it means having his heart shattered, and he defends his choice to Donald and Goofy by saying,
"Because who will I look after if I don't have Naminé?"
While it may not be portrayed in terms of gender, we are still witnessing a male character devaluing himself over his perceived failure to embody traits that have traditionally been associated with manhood, specifically that of protecting those he loves. So from the perspective of the heroine's journey and the broader cultural context, Sora's insecurities can be seen as a potential representation of how the idea that a man's value depends on his ability to live up to society's ideals of manhood affects men who do not meet those standards. So by learning to recognize his value as a person outside of what he can provide for others, as I've explained in previous videos the narrative is setting up for him, the subtext of Sora's character arc challenges the idea that living up to these ideals of masculinity is the sole measure of a man's worth, while putting Sora on the path to embracing the parts of himself considered traditionally feminine. But his arc is not the only one to challenge that role of protector and provider as the gold standard of a man's worth. Because we are shown throughout the series that Riku has been deliberately pushing himself into the role of a protector since he was only 5 years old. In Birth by Sleep, he outright tells Terra that he wants to leave the islands in order to find the strength to protect his friends. And in the original Japanese version of the flashback to their childhood during Kingdom Hearts 1, he proposes that he and Sora leave to explore other worlds after he gets stronger. When the pair are reunited in Traverse Town after the fall of Destiny Islands, Riku reacts to the arrival of a Shadow Heartless by telling Sora not to worry and to leave everything to him. And in the character files, he reflects on how he tried to fit himself into the role of an older brother figure to Sora when they were younger, and watch out for him when they went places. But because Riku has spent so much time trying to push himself into that specific role, seeing Sora able to protect himself in Kingdom Hearts 1 almost certainly exacerbated his fears of being left behind. Because in the mind of someone who's feeling insecure about his bond with someone he's defined his entire life around protecting, what incentive does that person have to keep him around if there's no service or resource that he can provide to make himself needed? And it's telling that while Riku does feel replaced by Donald and Goofy during his and Sora's reunion in Traverse Town, he only comments on their presence after Sora demonstrates his ability to fight off threats himself without relying on Riku to protect him. It makes it seem in hindsight like Riku's departure with Maleficent was inevitable from the moment Sora pulled out the Keyblade, and that Sora arguing with Donald about letting him come on the gummy ship was just the first opportunity he had to slip away. And it's fitting that Riku's downward spiral into darkness, culminating in attacking Sora and getting himself body snatched, only truly began after this scene. Because as Saïx said in Kingdom Hearts 2,
"Do you know what happens to those who lose their true purpose? Inevitably, they destroy themselves."
So, while Sora's character arc can be viewed as a potential commentary on how the expectation for men to be the primary protector and provider affects those who don't perfectly live up to that role, Riku's arc in Kingdom Hearts 1 can be seen as a deconstruction of how it affects those who do. Demonstrating how the idea that a man's value is tied to his ability to be the protector and provider for his loved ones can leave men feeling lost and insecure about their place when they are not able or needed to fulfill that role. Which is perfectly fitting because, as I've discussed in previous videos, Riku's role in Murdoch's version of the heroine's journey is that of the Animus, a character who represents the other side of the coin for the protagonist by showing who they could have become under different circumstances. And all of this is without even touching on how these expectations for men often go hand in hand with heteronormativity, but there is so much to say about that subject that I'm going to have to do a sequel to this video in order to do it all justice. As I said at the beginning of this video, the origins of the heroine's journey as a challenge and critique of the expectations that society has for how people of different genders are supposed to live is an essential part of what separates it from the hero's journey. And there is so much subtext in Kingdom Hearts that fits into this challenging of so-called traditional ideas of what men are supposed to be. From the rejection of the gender divide between the physical and the emotional, to the subtle deconstruction of how men are affected by the expectations of society. Thank you all so much for watching. Like usual, if you have any thoughts, observations, or counter-arguments about anything I've said here in today's video, feel free to share in the comments below. As always, be sure to click subscribe so you can be notified the next time I upload, and I'll see you all back here again on June 29th for my next video.